right around when George Floyd got murdered. And I said to you, like, I can't help. I'm really struggling with the fact that there's nothing I can do. And I was like, and that was almost a tipping point where a lot of obviously social unrest, and kind of rightly so, but it just felt like the world around us was kind of crumbling and falling down. And it caused a lot of a kind of anxiousness with me, because I guess I was lacking control. And I was like, what? There's nothing I can't fix this. And if you ask Chelsea, that is one of my worst habits, is just like, I'll fix it. I'll fix it. What can I do? That's just the way that I'm wired.
Hi, and welcome to episode 1 of Change and You. I am Catherine Alonso, and my host today is Vokes Macpherson. He is my baby brother, but he is also one of my best friends, honestly. And we wanted to do something a little bit different for the first episode, because I was anxious to explain to you a little bit of what it's all about and where it's all coming from. And so I would say Alec and I co-host this episode. We start off with me interviewing him a little bit, and then we switch seats and he interviews me to really be able to explain where this all came from, why are we even doing Change in You, what is this about, and what can you expect from listening to this podcast. And so Alec and I, of course, grew up with the same parents. We go into the lessons we each took away from our childhood and what occurred when we were younger with the loss of our older brother. And we really talk about how that has manifested in each of our lives. I would say that Alec and I are both really, really driven to make a difference in the world, but have taken completely different paths to doing that. And it was fantastic to jump in with him and understand his own philosophy in his role as a women's soccer coach. He is the head of the women's soccer team at Regis College in Massachusetts. And it was fascinating to be able to talk to him about not only his own philosophy for change, but how that overlaps with my philosophy for change and where we think it all originated from. So without any further ado, I'm excited to share my co-hosting interview type situation with the one and the only Vokes Macpherson. Alec Macpherson, welcome to co-hosting this very special podcast episode. Oh, wait, I messed up your name. Okay, hold on. Let's do it again.
Yeah, that's funny. I didn't even notice.
That is funny. I've been saying it a certain way for a very long time. Okay. Vokes Macpherson, welcome to co-hosting this very special podcast.
Thanks. Pleased to be here.
I'm really excited to have you here. So I'm going to start with the reins, as it were. I have some questions for you, and then I'm going to pass over the reins, and you're going to host, and you're going to ask me questions.
Sounds good.
We'll see how this goes. So I messed up the intro because initially I called you Alec Macpherson, which to me, as my younger brother, you have been for 40 years, but you're actually Vokes Macpherson because you recently got married.
Yeah, and for the record, I'm not 40. Just throwing that out there.
You're not that
I got a few
far,
years. I know, but we'll get there. But yes, Chelsea and I got married a little over 6 months ago, and we took each other's names, which is unique.
It is unique. What was the thought behind doing so? Her maiden name was Chelsea Vokes. Your maiden name was Alec Macpherson, and now you are Alec and Chelsea Vokes Macpherson. What was the thought behind doing that with your names?
Well, we had a pretty serious conversation about, Chelsea following the tradition of taking, the male name. Neither of us are traditionalists, and first and foremost, we love each other, so it was kind of nice to recognize each other's families. And it's very much, I live in Massachusetts, right around the corner from her parents. We live in the town she grew up in, so it doesn't feel like Chelsea was joining our family. It felt very much like two families coming together. And also, as someone who works with predominantly female student athletes, I saw this as a fantastic opportunity to kind of practice what I preach in terms of moving the needle on some some kind of traditions that are definitely not equal in terms of, so it was a pretty easy decision. I mean, we argued about whether it be Vokes Macpherson or Macpherson Vokes. I lost that argument, but I'm getting used to that at this point anyway.
Used to it now. What I need to do is, like I do with any friend that changes the name, is change it in my phone. Once I've changed it in my phone, because you see it all the time, then I'll start to say Alex Vokes Macpherson. So
there you go.
As a personal note. But you mentioned what you do for work. So tell me a little bit about your profession.
I'm privileged enough to spend my time coaching soccer full time. So I work at a small Division 3 college just outside of Boston called Regis College, and I'm the head coach of the women's soccer team. So obviously there's a lot of soccer involved with that, being on the field and training and whatnot, but coaching at the Division 3 level presents a lot of opportunities for holistic development, which is actually a big part of what I enjoy of the role that I have, especially, leadership, character and whatnot. They're the areas that we focus on to set up our student athletes for success beyond their collegiate soccer career. And a lot of our students at Regis are going into the medical field. So it's very demanding on them. And so we want to be able to prepare and equip them for that through some lessons they can learn about being part of our team.
And one of the things, what this podcast is all about, this brand new podcast is all about, is about how, as an individual, you create change in your life, in your community. What this season is about, this first season, is overcoming obstacles, and particularly overcoming obstacles to change. And how do you do that? And what are things that you can do? And I've got to imagine that there are a lot of obstacles that your student athletes face in terms of figuring out how to be collegiate athletes, like you said, a lot of your players are looking in the medical field, but also just how to navigate being that age, being at college. Would you say that obstacles are something that comes up a lot for them?
I think we probably use the term transition. We try and reframe it a little bit, make it a little bit more positive. But the transitions are almost constant. The biggest, of course, is from being a high school senior, where you're the eldest in your class. You feel incredibly comfortable in that environment, having spent multiple years at your school. You know your teachers, you know your schedule. And then all of a sudden you move out. You're living with someone that you may be friendly with, but not comfortable with sharing that space. New professors, new campus, new soccer team, new coach. And that happens in one moment. So that is the biggest transition. And we're very hands-on in providing a support structure during that first semester. The school has a great resource structure anyway. So we lean on a lot of the different departments. But then, as soon as you're settled into college, all of a sudden you transition from year 1 to year 2. Your classes become a little bit more rigorous. Year 2 to year 3, you become an upperclassman, and all of a sudden you have 2 grades of teammates below you looking up to you. And then, of course, you're a senior. You're preparing for life after college. You may be a captain or have a leadership role on your athletic team. Your academics, in terms of the rigor, has gone like crazy. We have a lot of nursing students, so they're in hospitals multiple days a week. And so I feel like that's one of the reasons I enjoy working in the collegiate environment so much, is that you're involved in this progressive transition where someone arrives as a young woman, but leaves as someone who has a better idea of what they want to do, what they want to be, and what they want to achieve.
Yeah, and who they are. I love your reframing of it from obstacles to transitions, because I think that even that is transformative to just that language change, because that's what an obstacle is. It's an opportunity to transition. You mentioned the support structure that you offer in the first semester. What's included in that support structure?
So at its very basic level, the thing that I try and do from the jump, even before the students arrive, is create a relationship that's built around trust and comfort, so that if there is ever something to address, whether it's a personal issue, an academic issue, a social issue, whatever support they need, they feel comfortable either coming to me one of the assistant coaches that works with our program, or if it's not anyone internally within the program, they know who they can go to externally, whether it's in our student affairs department or the counseling department. And I think that ultimately it's just presenting them with different options. You don't have to speak to me. You can go and find someone that you're going to be able to confide in and get the solution that you need. And then also, I think it's just breaking down that initial awkwardness, because again, the students that we work with are coming from a very, very comfortable environment where they are just used to it. Whether it's a professor, a teacher, an academic admin, a coach, especially in soccer, is like we try and make them feel like as comfortable as possible. So it's funny. I feel like I wear two very, very different hats. The second we step on the field, I'm about as serious as a person as you'll find. But in social environments, in the office or away from the field, I'm very laid back and try and make it very just open and inviting and inclusive. And I think that's the key to the initial success that we've had as a program.
So I'm curious about that a little bit, because as we are both leaders of teams, very different context, but same ingredients, I guess. You're leading a team of people. And one of the things that I heard early on in my own leadership journey that I kind of clung on to is that consistency as a leader is really important. And so those two sort of styles that you have on the field and off the field, do you feel like there's a challenge of consistency there, or it doesn't translate that way?
One of the things that I learned from the therapist I used to work with, and it was something I struggled with until very recently, is setting clear boundaries. So there's a transparency in our program. I clearly communicate to the team the second we're on the field, I hate wasting time. We're there to do work. It's not social hour. The second the practice is done, let's hang out, let's check in, let's goof around. So the boundaries are quite clear. And that's something, like I said, I learned a little bit later in my leadership kind of journey, if you will. And the clear defining of boundaries, I think, just puts everyone on the same page. We try to be super transparent from the initial interaction. And I've been working a ton of recruitment events this summer. So working with high school age players from that moment that I meet them until hopefully the moment they arrive and then graduate from Regis, I try to be as transparent as possible. Like humility and integrity are a couple of my personal core values. And I try and bring that into everything that I do.
I am so glad that you mentioned core values. So a huge part of my own work as a leader, but also somebody that is really invested in social change, but also change on a personal level, is core values, and figuring and utilizing core values as a tool. I think that you hear quite a lot about core values in organizations and core values as an individual, about having them, but you don't really hear that much about using them and using them as a tool in your everyday life. So my first question is, how did you discover what some of your core values are?
That process happened over several years. I mean, but for those that don't, I worked for several different collegiate programs under very different head coaches. And I was incredibly intentional about that, just to learn the different ways in executing effectively the same task. These are all women's soccer coaches working with teams that had similar structures and resources, but they were all very unique in the way that the leadership decided to, implement their vision. So that process allowed me to identify things that I thought worked well with me, maybe would work well in specific environments. And by the time I arrived at Regis, I was ready. Like day one, I already knew what I wanted to do. And so it really was driven by the experiences that I was able to gain by kind of pursuing and getting out there and trying to learn as much as possible. Even now, I just got back off vacation. I just bought another new leadership book, and I'm constantly trying to find ways to be like the term I like is servant leader. Like I want to serve the people that I work with it's not my team. I say to the girls all the time, it's their team. I'm just here to kind of provide as much assistance as I can. And so I think that being, to steal a Ted Lasso line, like being curious and inquisitive was very powerful in my personal journey.
Yeah. And are there ways that you utilize those core values on a daily basis in a conscious way?
We talk about humility a lot. I used to work with Celtic, my boyhood team that I'm still pretty obsessed with, and that was a core value that was just consistently communicated to their players in the youth academy. And I thought to myself, well, this, in my eyes, this is the best team in the world. This is a huge institution, and if humility is apparent every day with them, then who am I to think that like ego and things just don't really work well with me. So humility is something we discuss all the time. Again, like traditionally, I guess, in sports, the captain who has earned their stripes and been there a long time is then free of some obligations. They don't have to do the remedial tasks they had to do as a first year player. Now, that doesn't really work well for me, because then players are being treated differently. And I want to create a very equal environment, and therefore the expectations for everyone are the same. So humility is one that is there all the time. And I'm same as me. I'm more than happy to, we don't, just do the tasks that maybe people don't want to do. Clean the uniforms, things like that. I'll do whatever the team needs if it helps us to be successful. And then another one that I share with our team all the time is courage, especially in a sports environment. You're going to fail every day. Yeah. And the most important thing is having the resilience and that mindset to keep giving me the ball. I'm going to figure it out. And obviously, about my background, it was definitely not linear. It took some curves and some bumps in the road. And I think that it kind of built a resilience in me. And so I want to try and pay that forward and develop that in the young women that I'm working with.
Yeah. And actually, I should plug here that I've interviewed you for my other podcast, How to Change the World. I will look up the number of the episode and link it in the show notes for this episode. But there we get into a lot of your personal story and how you ended up here and where you are.
Mm-hmm. Sounds good.
Awesome. Well, so now feels like a good time for me to hand the reins over to you. And I was going to say I've never been interviewed before. That's not true. I've never been interviewed on my own podcast before. So we'll see how it goes. And
the original How to Change the World podcast interview was when I suggested that I interview you. If you remember.
It is true. And and we agreed then to do it, but it was years ago, life, but also the pandemic, I think, got in the way.
And I think that, I listen to a lot of podcasts and often, because hosts are so good at what they do about getting information out of their guests, sometimes I'm like, well, I actually really intrigued to know the host journey. So hopefully people get some value out of, the next few minutes. So I'm going to flip the script really and just say, I talked a little bit about my journey. You have a pretty unique journey. You're not born and raised in Phoenix. So why don't you share a little bit about kind of who you are and where you came from?
Sure thing. So my name is Catherine Sheila Joan Alonso. Just kidding. I was born in Scotland, in Aberdeen, in the 80s, and we moved fairly quickly to England. We moved around a ton. We grew up, we moved around a lot as kids because of our dad's job. I think our childhood really centered in two places, the south of England, for me, between ages 4 and 13-ish. And then we moved at 13 to the middle of England. Now, in the American scale, we moved really from like the equivalent of Tucson to Phoenix, which is nothing. But in the British scale, we moved across the country. And I was 13 and you'd have been like 9-ish. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep.
And I think I'd actually be interested to know your recollection of this move, but I think that was a tough transition for all of us.
I mean, it was pretty traumatic, really.
Yeah.
I mean, we lived in a small town where everyone knew everyone, and our network ran deep. We knew every neighbor. I was playing soccer with a really, really talented team that had players go on and make a career out of the game and whatnot. And for me, anyway, it was all I'd ever known because, of
Yeah.
course, that's where I was born. So that was the first time I'd really experienced like significant change, and it was tough for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, I think for me, it's funny. I love talking to you about this stuff because I'd never thought about it like that. That we were so networked in Hook, the town we lived in, which is true because we were also part of a local church, and our parents had friends, and we were friends with their kids, and we had this whole community. And then we moved to a much bigger town / city, and and for me, it was in the middle of year 8, which I think is 7th grade. I always have a hard time. It doesn't translate directly. It's either 7th or 9th. It's one or the other.
It's about right.
Yeah. I was 13 anyway. And I had a very hard time finding friends, and really struggled to really find a friendship group. And I would say that I didn't really until I was 17, 18, when I went to what British people call college, which is essentially the equivalent of the last 2 years of high school. And that's when I really started to find my people. And then I guess the other significant thing, one of my earliest memories, when I'm asked what my first memory is I say that it is you being born. Now, I actually don't think that's true. I think I've just heard the stories and seen the pictures so much that it feels like a real memory. But certainly, I think that you and I have always been close. There was a period of time, I think, through my teenage years where we fought a lot, but we always had each other's backs when we needed to.
Yeah, and I speak to a lot of high school age soccer players that are going through their recruitment process, and I always inquire about their family and, are you close? Oh, I fight with my sister, I fight with my brother. And I was like, yeah, that'll happen, but as long as you still have the kind of foundation of your relationship, you guys will be super tight. And I think that's something that obviously the last couple of years I've managed to obtain some opportunities that have required less support and advice from you. But there was a stage where I was calling you up frequently and checking in and kind of getting support. And, I don't know if I've been able to reciprocate a ton, but it has worked both ways, which is something that I appreciate because it's been very helpful over those years when I was figuring stuff out.
Yeah. Well, I think one of my favorite things about our relationship is we've always talked about stuff. We can just talk and talk and talk for hours. And we talk about little things and big things and deep stuff and shallow stuff. And I think that when you have that communication with somebody, it just makes it easier that when you do need to talk about something, you can call them and it's not awkward. You can just have a conversation. But I guess the other significant piece, and we talked about this on when I interviewed you for How to Change the World, is that when I was 6 months old and before you were born, our older brother died in an accident. And obviously neither of us remember him. I was 6 months old. You didn't exist. But he is, I would say, I'm interested in your thoughts on this, but I would say that he is a big part of our family and our upbringing as any sibling is.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I can cite, and you were there, right? There's moments I really struggle to talk about it. It makes me very emotional. And that's probably just because I've never really processed it. Not really. We talk about it internally, but externally, when I was younger, I always try to avoid the subject.
Mm-hmm.
But nowadays, he's never too far from my thoughts. I'm always, it's always in the forefront of my mind anyway. And it does feel very much like, even though we were never on the earth at the same time, that, that doesn't impact the relationship, for want of a better term, that we have.
Yeah. The bond. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that Rory and who he was to each of us is alive and well. And now, I think now that we're all older, you, me, mum and dad, we talk about him more than we did growing up, I think.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I don't really know why that is. I don't know why that is. Maybe over the passage of time, we've all reflected and you become more aware of the impact that he had, or I don't know. I mean, I certainly know for me that over probably this started around 2015. So sidebar, I'm coming back to this, but sidebar. So um, I started Javelina with two co-founding partners, my company Javelina, in 2012. And we ran it, just the three of us. We had a team, but the three of us were co-leaders, if you will, until 2017. But in 2017, we had 4 or 5 employees. And at that point, you really needed like a person who was in charge. And so I became CEO in 2017. And so that was a pivotal moment for me. There's like before CEO and after CEO. Before CEO, yes, I had a business, but it wasn't something that I fully applied myself to. When I became CEO, it was like, right, how do I be good at this? How do I be a good leader? And I think that there's a responsibility that settled on my shoulders when I had that title that I didn't quite feel in the same way before. And so I did a lot of the things that you described. I read every leadership book. I listened to podcasts. I think I started working with a coach around that time. And through those various opportunities, I was, reflecting on sort of who I am and the kind of leader I am and why it all matters. And then at the time, I think it was 2016-ish, because in one of these books I'd read, it said that your company really should have core values. And so we started going through a process at Javelina to figure out what our core values were. And I really enjoyed the process. I found it so enlightening and so interesting. And I just naturally started thinking, I wonder if you could do this for a person. And so I kind of made my own process and figured out not only what my core values were, but what my mission statement was as a person and what my purpose statement was as a person. And that was an incredibly reflective process. And it didn't happen in 1 week or 1 month or even 1 year. I think it was like little by little over time. But to my surprise, what came out in terms of thinking about where does all of this come from and why do I care about the things that I care about was really Rory. And Rory's absence in our upbringing, but I think what mum and dad taught us because of their loss of their son. And I feel like there were 2 prevailing lessons that I took away from it growing up. One was life is precious and fragile. And as they said to us, good things happen to bad people. Tomorrow isn't promised. I didn't have this sense of security that everything would be okay. And actually how that translated for me for a long time was a fear of the people around me dying in like a really, I was going to say irrational way, but it's not an irrational fear. Actually, it's a very rational fear, but in a way that I didn't have control over. That I was incredibly safe. If I didn't hear back from somebody for an hour, I was convinced they were dead, stuff like that. So, but I've worked on that, and so I'm not that as sensitive to that fear anymore. But anyway, just the sense that like I was not on solid ground that always would remain solid. Things could change. And then the other lesson is that given that reality, the only power that you do have really as a human, the only thing that's certain is your ability to use kindness as a tool. That what you have that you can give to other people is kindness. And I remember mom did so much charity stuff. And I remember her going door to door, asking for financial donations for the Salvation Army or a charity of some name. And she would get like verbally abused, door slammed in her face, things thrown at her, but she was just so intent on doing that. And then mum and dad always donated things to charity drives. They did a lot of stuff in their church. And I think we were just brought up to do things in the lives of other people.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny as you share that. Um, very, very briefly, would like to share a story of something we implemented within our team. So I joined, actually, my 1 year anniversary was earlier this week. So about this time last year, which is a month before the players show up for preseason. So not a long time. But what we were able to do, which was a big win for me, is I am a big advocate of paying it forward. We're a very privileged environment. We're college athletes. So our student athletes get access to resources that regular students don't, and those resources are awesome. And so therefore it's a position of privilege, and we want to be able to use that position to maybe make a positive impact in those that aren't quite as privileged. And what we were able to do is we designed some T-shirts and raise money for the Alzheimer's Association, which is obviously a charity close to our family because our grandfather had Alzheimer's before he passed away. And what I wanted to show the girls what they could do is, if we are organized and if we work hard, we can make a really big impression. So we made T-shirts, we created a selling schedule, we got involved with the local chapter, and we raised just a little under $2,000 to donate. The program took absolutely nothing. We kept $0 for our team, but we were able to generate, this donation, which hopefully is going to positively impact, the families that are impacted by Alzheimer's, which is obviously such a debilitating disease, unfortunately. And now the girls are arguing about which charity they want to raise money for. So it kind of lit that flame. And because they have seen the structure, it's a player-led project. I will help when they need, but they're empowered to go do it. And that's really, I think, you were just talking about all of that. That's been such a constant in my life as well. It's just finding opportunities to pay it forward, because we've, growing up, we've been fortunate, we've been privileged in certain circumstances, I would say. And so helping those that maybe aren't quite as privileged is been very constant.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think one of the things that we were both taught, maybe not explicitly, but because I don't remember mum and dad ever saying this to us explicitly, but I think we're both this way. So we've learned it somehow, which is that you as an individual have the power to make change. And maybe it's change in your own life, maybe it's change in your community, maybe it's change in your team, maybe it's change with a charity, whatever it is, but you have power, you have agency. And that belief is a core philosophy of mine, if not my core philosophy, is you can make change. I think that oftentimes just the experience of living life, but particularly right now, I think there's a lot of hard things going on for a lot of people right now. It's a stressful time to be alive. It is easy to feel disempowered and that you don't have agency and that you don't have the possibility to make a difference, that people feel stuck, or they feel that they don't have the tools to be able to do something. Oftentimes, I think people don't feel like they don't have the right. They don't have the right to make a change. Like, who am I to aspire to raise money for Alzheimer's or whatever it might be? And so that philosophy, you can make change, is really the fundamental underlying impetus behind my new business, all of which is explained on catherinealonzo.com, and this podcast, is to really not only provide tools for people to make that change, but to inspire people to do so.
I'm glad you mentioned the word inspire, because that's what I was just going to bring up, is that you and I talk a lot about podcasts we listen to, books on tape, reading books or whatever. I mentioned that I do it for educational purposes, to try and learn, but I think inspiration is half the battle. Yeah. Because it's one thing that we talk about in the team is motivation is inconsistent. Some days you wake up and you feel great and you want to get after it. The next day, maybe you're coming off, an argument with a friend, or you didn't sleep well, or you're stressed at work or at school. That's something we talk about a lot with our team. And so motivation is going to ebb and flow, but consistency is the most important thing. Still showing up, still doing whatever it is you can do on that day, whatever your gas tank will allow, and not expecting to be able to be, a superhero 24/7. And I think that inspiration comes, I get inspired by podcasts, books, interactions. And I think that is so important, because if that inspiration doesn't exist, then it's very easy to just regress into a cycle of, well, what's the point? Like, oh, even if I try, I'm not going to raise any money for charity, or if I try, I'm not going to be able to make an impact in this project that I'm working on, or whatever it may be. So trying to instill that consistency versus, the motivation is so important.
Yeah, I'm so glad that you said that. And I think that has become something I've come around to only in the last few weeks. So what happened was, somebody said to me, they said, you are inspirational and your content is inspirational. And, when I think about inspirational people, I think about Barack Obama, or, people who are just like, feel out of reach for me. I'm like, well, I'm not inspirational. It feels like sort of an egotistical thing to say. And so I really resisted that. And then somebody else said it, and this word inspire just keeps coming up. And what I have come to realize just in the last few weeks is that is absolutely what this is about. That I am providing content, I'm providing stories, I'm providing examples to inspire people to make change in their own life. That hearing your story about your team and it being player led too, that you created a structure so that they can be player led and they can raise money every single year for a charity that matters to them, that will inspire somebody else to think what they might be able to do with a group of people they have access to. And that, I think, is a huge part of it, because you can't be what you can't see. So if you don't see other people doing it, you can't do it yourself. And I think it's specifically relevant for social change, because up to this point in the last few decades, we think that the people that drive social change are elected officials, politicians, maybe some business leaders, activists, and Oprah Winfrey. And if you don't see yourself in one of those boxes, then you don't think that you can make change. Whereas I really believe that everybody can make change. And so being able to share those stories of people that are doing that hopefully will inspire others to do the same.
It's funny because I have a vivid memory of texting you or speaking with you on the phone, I forget when, right around when George Floyd got murdered. And I said to you, like, I can't help. I'm really struggling with the fact that there's nothing I can do. And I was like, and that was almost a tipping point where a lot of obviously social unrest, and kind of rightly so, but it just felt like the world around us was kind of crumbling and falling down. And it caused a lot of a kind of anxiousness with me, because I guess I was lacking control. And I was like, what? There's nothing I can't fix this. And if you ask Chelsea, that is one of my worst habits, is just like, I'll fix it. I'll fix it. What can I do? That's just the way that I'm wired. But on reflection, what I've been able to see is that sometimes the biggest change is just like that individual interaction. And then, that person will speak to two people, and those two people will go on. And hopefully a lot of mine is just compassion led. I just want to be caring and have people feel like I genuinely care. And I think if they can then pay that forward and it creates this domino effect, then, that's going to be a positive impact one way or another. So it's definitely, I've been able to look at the huge issues and try and find the daily things that I can do that will impact my community, the people I speak to a lot. And then hopefully, they will be inspired to do the same.
Yeah, exactly. And I think as we are people with great privilege, saying something about an issue, talking for us as white people and for you as a white man, identifying structural racism and how insidious it is in our society, and that it's something that we see and something that we are going to take a role in changing. There's power in that. It's not everything. I'm not saying that like we're saving the world or anything like that, but there is power in that. Just like anybody paying attention to an issue, you changing your name to both be Vokes Macpherson, and doing so because of it's intentional, and it aligns with your values, and it aligns with what you care about as a person that coaches women. That is, other people will see that, and they will think more about their own choices and how they might be able to align their values with the things they do on a day in, day out basis.
Yeah, I mean, that one's pretty extreme, right? Like changing your name's a big deal. It doesn't happen very often.
Yeah.
But for me, I mean, I really like my Scottish name. I'm obviously obsessed with my Scottish heritage. I definitely feel more Scottish than anything else. But I didn't feel like I was losing anything. Or I just felt like I was gaining so much. I'll have to give a shout out. There's a podcast I listen to. One of the co-presenters is called Matt Davis Adams. He's a journalist, a soccer journalist in the UK. Never met him. He has no idea who I am. But he was the first person I ever came across in the media. And they were like, "Oh, why do you change your name?" And he's like, "Well, my wife and I are married. We're a partnership." And I don't know. I have a memory of that. That's probably why that probably did inspire me. And again, who knows? Someone may see my new name on Team's website or social media or something, and it may just trigger that same thought. I don't know that, but it's not really why I did it either. If it happens, cool. But this was definitely for something that Chelsea and I wanted to do together.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's such a great example of how something that you do can inspire others.
Yeah, and that's one thing that I'd love to kind of pick your brain a little bit about. Obviously, we both grew up in the UK, but yet we live in the US. And I don't really remember talking to you when we were kids about that transition. Like, you had graduated from the University of Nottingham. You weren't quite ready to be done with your academic experience, and you had applied to a few different programs, and all of a sudden you were leaving for Arizona. Like that, I don't really remember sitting down and you kind of, well, not with me anyway, determining which was the best option. So how did you land where you ended up?
Honestly, it wasn't that much different from your memory. So there were a couple of reasons that motivated wanting to study abroad. I'd always wanted to study abroad. I always loved traveling. I'd never been to America. And I had picked my undergraduate university based on the fact that they had a really fantastic study abroad program. But the thing about a British degree is it's 3 years versus a 4-year degree in America. And when I first got there, I was like, I don't know that I want to spend a third of my time in Nottingham, not in Nottingham. So I ended up not doing the study abroad. But it was something that I don't know, regret is the right word, but I was just aware of the fact that this was something I'd wanted to do. And also, honestly, transparently, I didn't feel ready to work full time. I wasn't that interested. So I decided to do a master's degree in America. We have an aunt who's from America. So she helped me out. She gave me a list of universities to look at. I always wanted to live somewhere hot. I was born a hot weather person. You and Mum and Dad are cold weather people. And I grew up in a house in cold England where the windows were always open. I was just always cold. And so I was done with being cold and I wanted to live in a hot place. And so I went through the list that Heidi gave me and Googled them, or not Googled, looked up on AOL, all of them. Google didn't exist. And just looked at the weather. And I remember, Alec, I was sitting upstairs in the study with the dial-up internet, like old clunky computer that was in the corner, just to give you an image. And I went through all of them. There's like 10 universities on this list and looked up the weather. But this was the early days of the internet, and I'm not necessarily the sharpest tool in the shed always. And so I didn't account for the time difference. So I looked up the weather in that moment. And I was like, well, Arizona looks lovely. So I applied to Arizona State and the University of South Florida, not factoring in, of course, how hot it gets at Arizona. And then applied to both, chose ASU because, this was the early-ish days of online applications for international students, and the system just wasn't that easy. Like, for example, we don't have a GPA system in the UK, and the online system wouldn't let you go past without putting in a GPA. things like that were just hard to navigate. And ASU were just so much more helpful. And so I chose ASU, thought I would come here to do 2 years. That was always the plan. Honestly, it was pretty quickly that I started to think this might be longer than a 2-year thing. I don't know that I plan to necessarily build my life here. That's just kind of ended up happening. But I think that what I love about, and America has its problems, don't get me wrong. It definitely has many, many problems. But culturally, it's a fit for me because it's a very, I have experienced it to be quite an optimistic culture that really believes in the power of the individual to do great things. Whereas the UK, I think, by contrast, can be a little bit more of a pessimistic culture that is about doing that. You have to earn your keep, and you have to, opportunities will be given to you when you've earned them and when you deserve them. And I think that that's why America was such a good fit for me.
I'd agree with that analysis. Is growing up, it was very much kind of keep your head down, earn your stripes, your time will come. Whereas here, I feel that they, not always, but there is a consistent direct correlation. If you put enough in, you're going to get out whatever that outcome is that you're aspirational for. And Arizona is too hot, just as a caveat.
Well, the winter's so great. We are going through this awful heat wave right now, but generally it's nice in the winter.
Well, I was actually had this conversation yesterday with a recruit was on campus with a grandmother who is from New Mexico, and she was complaining about the heat. And I was like, Arizona is great between November and March. That is the best time to go. And to be honest, I don't think I've ever visited outside of that window, so I can't really speak to it. But it's always so funny sharing with people that don't know our family. Like, oh yeah, actually, my sibling lives here too. Neither of us by design, really, very much circumstantial, but also circumstances create opportunities. I talk about opportunity a lot with the student athletes I work with because opportunities are limited. You're only on the soccer field for a certain amount of time a day, and you're not getting that time back. So how do you feel your experience first as a student? And you actually, if I remember correctly, you were like a TA, you had to teach some undergrad classes. But now the doors that opened once you arrived, how has that kind of forged the path that you ended up treading?
Oh, that's such a good question. So opportunity was definitely a part of it. And then one of the things that I did for myself when I moved here is I took away the parental support a little bit. Like I think mom and dad absolutely would have helped if I'd have been stuck, but I just wanted to fix it for myself. I wanted to figure it out for myself. So I had absolutely no money when I first moved here. As an international student, you're only allowed to work for 20 hours a week on campus. So I worked for 20 hours a week at a bagel store and was just making next to no money, living on just basically my overdraft and high interest rate credit cards. And mom found out about that later and was like, why didn't you tell us? But I think I wanted to figure it out myself. So it was opportunity, but also just figuring it out. That's what it was. I think I enjoy figuring stuff out, and everything is figure outable, which I like doing that. And then I think also the thing that I developed along the way as I lived here was a tolerance for risk, that I am quite comfortable just trying stuff. And if it doesn't work out, I'll figure it out. And I'm not reckless. I try and always think about what plan B would be, but I do just try a bunch of stuff, and it works out enough to keep you motivated to keep trying new things.
I think that aligns with how you describe the culture in the US versus the UK, right? I think that you talk about optimism and pessimism, and I'd say that growing up, taking risks. I remember everyone's had this conversation, especially anyone that's interested in soccer. I was 15. I had to pick my exams. What do you want to be? At the time, I think I wanted to. I definitely knew I wasn't good enough to be a professional soccer player, but I wanted to be involved in soccer in some capacity. And my teacher, Madame Smith, who is notorious for anyone that went to Tudor Grange, shot me down. You're like, nope, there's no way you can do that. You just can't do that. And whereas, while I'm not saying that every teacher here is going to be like, oh, you want to play in the NFL, the NBA, whatever, you can do that. I do feel like there's a little bit more of a support system here to give things a shot and give it your best and see what happens.
That's such full circle, Alec, because I'd actually forgotten that Madame Smith was your tutor. So she was my French teacher, not my form tutor, but she was my French teacher. And she is I love languages, and now I speak Spanish. She was the reason I didn't do French, because same thing, she told me I wasn't good enough. And I think that my guiding philosophy, the reason behind this podcast, the reason behind this business is the anti-Madame Smith. Like, I'm not, rather than telling people that they can't or telling people that they're not capable, it's the exact opposite. I'm going to tell you that you are capable, even if it takes some risk, and even if it requires taking a leap of faith. But I'm here to tell you that you absolutely can.
And that's definitely been a big part of my experience too. I've mentioned briefly earlier that I was working with a therapist previously, something that was way outside of my comfort zone, not a super self-reflection kind of guy, but it was someone who was pushing me in the right direction, challenging me to figure out how to live the best kind of life I could live. And it's funny because I have a direct example from our most recent spring season, in that we work out in the weight room a lot when we're off season, and we had multiple student athletes that weren't experienced in the gym, something that I think both you and I have grown to love and see both physical and mental benefits from that. And they were so apprehensive about their own ability, because it was just, they were so far out of their comfort zone. But we were there to support them, to spot them on, like, you can do this. And to see them realize that is, I mean, selfishly, I think that is one of the most consistent reasons why people coach, is helping others realize their potential. Because it just makes you feel all warm and fuzzy inside. And I think it's just such a special part of what I get to do.
Yeah.
And what you hope is then that those people can find their own ways of doing that with people that they interact with in the future.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what is the, I mean, you kind of mentioned it, but do you want to talk a bit more detail in terms of, this is a new podcast. You already talked a little bit about what it is, but I think that you can dig a little bit deeper into what the ultimate goal is and who you think can benefit from tuning in.
So my new business, all of details of which are at catherinealonso.com, like I said, is all about helping people make change. You can make change in your community and in your life. And what the podcast is really about is, and this builds exactly on what you were just saying, Alec. It's your buddy. It's like your accountability buddy that's just in your corner saying, yes, you can. Yes, you can. Here's how. Here's the next step. Here's how to dust yourself off when you fall in. Here's what to do when you're feeling overwhelmed. Here's how you can share your story so that other people can be inspired. And what we're going to do is with the podcast is go seasons. We're doing season style, and I'm going to focus each season on a particular topic. And this first season is all about overcoming obstacles. How can you overcome the things that get in your way when it comes to making change? So some of them will focus on individual change. What are the things that get in the way on an individual basis? And then some of them will focus on community change. And honestly, the two things, I'll get into this more as the podcast goes on, but the two things, individual change and community change, are interwoven, which is why I talk about both.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And anyone that likes podcasts has their go-to podcast they listen to every week. They wait for the release date. I'm exactly the same. So to have that accountability is huge. So I'm sure that you're going to spread a lot of positive messages and help a lot of people out. I'm excited to see what happens.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for doing this with me. This was so much fun, and we'll have to get you back in the future.
Sounds good. I've never done this before, so hopefully it was okay.
You did great. You did great.